Usmani, and you're watching another episode of the Fulbright Women Podcast Season 1, where we bring to you the brightest women of Pakistan and share some amazing work that they're doing in their fields. Today, we have Nimra Shakeel with us. Nimra went to Carnegie Mellon University for her Fulbright and got her master's in electrical and computer engineering. And today, we are talking about bias, fairness, and ethics in artificial intelligence and big data. Hi, how are you?
Hi. Yeah, so it's nice to meet you finally. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks.
Perfect. So I think we should just start our conversation right away because I cannot wait to talk about all the things that I have on my list for our conversation today. But before we begin,
Yeah.
I kind of want to understand if you could explain AI, artificial intelligence, and big data for those of us who probably don't really understand it well.
Right. So artificial intelligence is the high level aim is to make computers as intelligent as humans. So intelligence is not a very well defined idea, but we all can spot it when we see it. And human beings are intelligent, and some animals are intelligent to some degree, right? They can set goals and they can work towards achieving those goals. As for achieving any idea, so humans have always tried to emulate anything they see in nature, right? So we wanted to, for example, we saw birds flying and we got the idea of flying from birds. So similarly, people would have always wanted to replicate the idea of intelligence in a machine. And when you look at the details, there are many aspects to it. So big data is more about finding patterns, like having data at a very large scale. So you are collecting data from lots of points on, say, lots of people, and you are finding some patterns in them. So yeah, that's the high level goal of artificial intelligence. And so the way humans interact with each other, it's usually through videos or pictures. So understanding videos and understanding pictures and like identifying people, that is one sub area of artificial intelligence, and that's computer vision. And another area is natural language processing, which is pretty popular right now. And that is the goal of trying to teach language to computers. So computers, when you are saying something to them in natural language, which is the language you and me are using, computers should be able to understand that, and they should be able to process that, and they should ideally be able to answer you back. For example, you might want to have a conversation with a bot. I mean, it might have less trouble connecting to Zoom than
There's a very interesting word that you used here, but I'm going to come on to that later, which was natural. I want to come on to it. And when we talk about the bias and everything, what is considered natural, right, when it comes to language. But I'll come to that later. Before we go, in that space, what pulled you into artificial intelligence?
What pulled me to artificial intelligence? Well, there's a very kind of cliched joke, I'd say, the lack of the natural thing. So trying to compensate for that. But what I find fascinating is, I mean, it's a pretty unsolved problem as of right now. The deep learning approach has led to advances, but those are basically due to data, and people don't fully understand how that is working. And when you look at the higher level aspects of intelligence, those are I mean, we don't understand them even right now, and trying to build them into computers is a even more complex goal. Particularly for me, I've always been fascinated by mathematics, and then I also have some interest in language, so I think that's where the intersection arises from.
All right. When we think about artificial intelligence or big data, there is a big debate going on, in the world, and that debate lies at the intersection of ethics, fairness, and legislation.
Yeah.
Right? And I have certain, questions. I want to kind of break it all down into little prompts so that we can hear more in detail from you. Let's start with the first one, which is artificial intelligence biased?
Is artificial intelligence biased? Okay, so the thing is, artificial intelligence is created by humans, and ultimately there are some people who are sitting down there and they're writing the algorithms. And if you're talking about the data, because artificial intelligence algorithms usually need data to reach some decision. So if there's data, then that data has been collected by some human beings, and it has been annotated or labeled or marked by some human beings. So algorithms really learn from data, and whenever there's discussion about bias and algorithm giving you biased results, I think it's more about the bias inherent in the data and the bias inherent in the decisions made by some human beings in the past. Because AI is all about learning from the past or learning from the experience. So you have some experiences, you learn from them, and you predict how to behave, how the algorithm should behave in the future.
Is it humanly possible, Nimra, to completely get rid of any kind of bias when we're talking about humans?
Well, that's the goal of ethics, right? And to get rid of all biases and your preconceived notions. But that's actually a very interesting question, and I think that is one of the problems that lies at the heart of the human condition, right? Because you are ultimately a human being, and you have been groomed in a certain kind of environment, and the effect of those that environment can be very can act on a very subconscious level, and it is very hard to spot those kind of biases. But ultimately, when we aspire to some higher ideals like justice or fairness, we do try to look at our behavior and like tweak it in order to comply with some values. So yeah, it's I think it's a hard question generally, and maybe it relates more to psychology or and cognitive science and I'd say philosophy. It's not exactly only the domain of artificial intelligence.
I think I think it kind of leads me to think about access, right? Because I think bias is kind of interlinked with access. The more number of people have access to that world, the lesser we can reduce the bias. Um, what I mean is that, a lot of people in the world, don't even understand what is artificial intelligence, right? While at the same time, there's this other part
Right.
of the world that is making like leaps and bounds of progress in this domain, right? So bias is naturally, meant to be there because the people who are not made to be a part of this world are not made to participate in, the technology, right? Can you talk about access when it comes to artificial intelligence?
So yeah, so access is again a general purpose problem. For example, in a society, in any society, there's a select group of people who are making laws, and laws govern our behavior all the way, right? And the laws define how people independently act. Laws mainly define how people interact with each other. So that problem is there too, right? There's a small group of people who are making laws, and there's a huge population who has to act within those laws, and they have very small say in how those laws are made. Democracy is one solution, but there are limitations of democracy too, and how much power people actually have in any democracy, right? For example, in ours. So the problem is not just with AI, but yeah, with the technology, with the advancement of technology, I think the access problem is accelerating to some extent. Uh, the gap between the haves and the have-nots is widening. Technology does try to mitigate that in some way. For example, through YouTube and through open courseware sharing, people do try to convey knowledge to those people who don't have access to it. But still, there are barriers. For example, if someone has some very, for example, some if there are some very good courses, university courses in artificial intelligence, but they are in English, how much useful would they be for the general Pakistani population? So yeah, the problem of access is there.
Great that you mentioned that last point because remember how earlier on I said you use this word natural when it comes to languages?
Yeah.
That is what I wanted to talk about, right? Again, from my layman perspective, I'm going to connect access to it as well. What is really natural when it comes to, language? Are we, because there was this other report that I was looking at, which was basically talking about racism when it comes to technology, right? Which may not be consciously being done, but subconsciously it's happening because certain group of people have more access to this technology and certain group doesn't. Can you talk
Yeah.
about that concept of, what is natural when it comes to language in artificial intelligence and how it's being taken care of?
Yeah, so natural language just refers to the kind of language that people use when talking to themselves, when talking to each other, and that kind of language. Because mathematically, language can be defined very formally. I mean, mathematics is a language. If you are doing algebra, you are remaining within the confines of a certain language. So that is what natural language means here. But again, the problem of access, for example, if there's an algorithm that's making decision about job applicants, which applicants to grant an interview to and which ones to ignore, right? And if there's a certain population, if there's a certain group of people who apply more there, and there's a certain group from which people rarely apply. So that's the problem of access. A certain subset of the population doesn't even have access to those job openings and how to apply. They don't even know how to apply, right? So the algorithms, and if they don't perform well, the algorithm is definitely going to learn that that subset of population should be ignored. And even if a somewhat more competent individual comes in from that subsegment, the algorithm might not be able to make a very good decision. So that is the problem with access.
I guess what I was trying to get at is, you know, um, there, in terms of human languages, there's not just one or two, English or Urdu or Japanese. There is
Right.
there are many number of languages in the world, right?
Yeah.
But our technology is not yet made to recognize all of them. I could be wrong because I
Yeah.
don't know enough about the world, but what I see from a user's perspective, right? That's what I see. Because, for example, we're talking about Siri or we're talking about any other, so they catch certain accents, they're not able to understand certain accents. And by default, what you're doing is you're kind of excluding a certain kind of people who are not able to,
Yeah.
speak in an accent that the technology is made to understand or can understand. And I understand that there's room for improvement always, right? But that is something what I was trying to get at when we, term something as natural. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that's the problem of low resource. We call them low resource languages in natural language processing or and in AI because ultimately people in AI work with data sets and with marked data sets most of the time. So a lot of work has been done in a few languages, and English is the major example here. So, but yes, there are a lot of languages in the world, and some of them don't have a large number of speakers, and we don't have good data sets for those languages. And this is actually a real concern and a very valid one at that. That with the advancement of AI, those languages are going to get left behind. And actually, this again goes back a bit further, and it's not just about AI and these languages. It's about digitalization and these languages, because if a language is not represented well in the digital sphere, you don't have a lot of data sets, you don't have good ways of writing it and fixed ways of writing it. For example, I can talk about Urdu. Urdu did get a s- I mean, there was InPage and it worked for quite a lot of time, for quite a long time, but it was an image-based software. So when you were typing Urdu, you were ultimately converting that to images, and that hurt the progress of the language in the digital sphere. So yeah, that concern is again valid too. That ultimately those languages are going to get ignored somewhat,
That's right.
and a few major languages are going to dominate. Yeah.
And and while that is a valid concern, right? And I'm sure work is being done on that. Hopefully, work is being done on that front. We also hear people have this like there are conspiracy theories everywhere, and there's this fear of the unknown, right? And you know where I'm
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
at actually. So, can you address that? Is AI good for the people and the planet?
AI is just a tool. I mean, I might be advocating AI too, but ultimately, I think the balanced way to look at it is just a tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. There are some cases about which we can discuss whether those use cases are good or not. But ultimately, anything can be used in any way. And I completely sympathize with the fear of the unknown, and I think that's a real concern. But I don't know. I mean, progress has its own way of happening, and there are innovations happening all the time, whether we like them or not. And people are jumping on the bandwagon, and I think the best we can try is to educate ourselves and to look at things rationally and critically and to understand the nuances. And there are definitely downsides to every new technology. I wouldn't say that there's anything, except for maybe drug discoveries, which are just a benefit to humanity. But these tools do have nuances. Yeah.
So I guess what you're getting at is that mistakes will be made when progress is being made, and then mistakes will be corrected, rectified. It is all part of progress and growth as long as we're making an honest approach towards the progress that we're making. Is that what is that that's
Yeah,
what I'm
to some, yeah, to some extent. And then there's also the fact about the people and their motivations, why a certain group of people is doing something. So for example, if Urdu is not well represented in the AI community, I mean, the people who work with Urdu are the ones who should be majorly concerned, right? For example, I think that digitalization is very necessary for in order to teach language to people, or and for example kids and the new generation. So it should be represented well. So ultimately, I mean, we are responsible for it to some extent. uh, yeah.
So I'm sure, like you said, Urdu is one of your languages and you're in AI. Do you feel the burden of representation of the language sometimes? Or if not the burden of representation, do you even think about, like, because you said the onus is on us, right? Do you think about that? How can we solve that issue of access when it comes to the language of Urdu in AI?
Yeah, I do feel the onus is on us, but personally, I haven't worked much with Urdu and AI. But and I think there are people working. There is a certain institution. I think they are doing work on it. But I think as a people, we should be focusing more attention on it, because ultimately, language is uh, a summary of your culture. So whatever is there in your culture, whatever you are, ultimately you are going to represent it in language in some way, right? It gets written down in books, it gets written down in fiction. And if you are imparting knowledge to people, maybe you should be doing it through the language that is majorly spoken. So yeah.
Uh, Nimra, there was another thing I was thinking as an outsider. I understand there might be or might not be enough gatekeeping that is happening in the AI world, but can you talk about the need of transparency in artificial intelligence, for the sake of better understandability and for the sake of better interpretability of the regular people, as one may say?
Right. So transparency is important in a number of areas. As a user, you should be very informed about where your data is being used and how, because data is being collected on you, whether you like it or not. And that is something that is very important for example, democracy. That's one aspect of it. Democracy is work on transparency. So wherever you have data and it is being collected or used somewhere, you should be made aware of it. You should be very clear of it about it. And you should also have your consent about it, whether you want your data to be used or not. So data privacy is one issue. Because with the advent of technology, the problems are going to get more serious. For example, facial recognition software. So, for example, you might not want your face to be recognized by every facial recognition software everywhere, right? So, how are we going to achieve that? How are we going to give you those rights? That is one question. Then transparency is another issue, and transparency is about when some algorithm makes some decisions, how did it arrive on those decisions? So, for example, if you have an autonomous car, and I think you'd like to know what it would do if the trolley problem arises. So the trolley problem is a very famous example, and it comes up in the context of self-driving cars, right? Uh, it's an age old ethical problem, and the problem is like a trolley is going somewhere, and there are like say 3 or 5 people, in its path, and you're a bystander, and you can press a lever, and if you press a lever, it goes to another path, but then it kills a single person. So you have the option to decide whether you want to kill three people or one person, and you actively have to press a lever to do that. So that is very relevant in the case of autonomous cars and self-driving. You would want to know what algorithms were encoded there. Uh,
Hmm.
so that's how transparency comes into play.
That, that kind of also wants me to ask you this thing. Who do we turn to when an algorithm, goes wrong or has harmful, outcomes? Are there any legislation
Right.
in place? What is happening on that front?
So what? Why? Yeah. So again, that's a relevant question. Who is responsible for the decisions an algorithm makes? Is it the algorithm encoder, the person who wrote it, the person who collected data for it, or is it the user? So yeah, those things are ultimately going to come in the domain of law, and there are going to be legislations around that. But right now, I don't think there's a lot of work about that.
Oh, there's not much happening right now.
Yeah, so self-driving cars are a thing in the US, for example, and there's some discussion about laws around them, but not in Pakistan.
So, there was something Elon Musk has, famously said that it is AI is most likely to take over, the world, overtake humans in the next 5 years by 2025. What are your views on that?
I don't know. Maybe he doesn't closely work with AI. That's why he's so optimistic about it. People who work on it tend to be a bit pessimistic. Taking over is a very again, taking over implies a very high level of intelligence, right? And that's about the problem of building consciousness in machines. How do you make a machine conscious of itself, that it is an entity and it exists and it is alive, and it should work towards its benefit, or to achieve it, set its own goals and achieve them. So yeah, I think we are very, very far away from that. And in artificial intelligence, we don't even know if we can build that. We don't know if there are any inherent laws that govern intelligence. For example, like laws that govern movement in the world, laws that Newton discovered. We don't know if there are laws of intelligence, and we don't know if they are going to stop us from building a machine like that or not. But taking over is a very far away scenario. I think we should be more concerned about a small set of people taking over the world and governing it for the rest of us. So that's more relevant.
That's true. I also feel like taking over is a very, competitive word that way, and could,
Yeah,
induce fear in a large population that's still trying to understand what artificial
yeah,
intelligence really is, right? Because at the heart of it, I think you can talk better about it. At the heart of it, what people in the AI world and big data world, I would like to believe, are trying to do is kind of make life easier and more efficient. Uh, you can talk about this as opposed to
that's what we tell ourselves. Well, there are data algorithms that work on data can bring you benefits in many, many areas. And the areas that I personally feel very fascinating are related to health. And that's a very real impact you can have there. You can, for example, doctors make decisions, and sometimes those decisions tend to be biased because we are human. And ultimately, when human beings are making decisions, they tend to be biased. And you can try to eliminate that through AI. And for example, you can possibly discover high level patterns in data that a doctor alone might not be able to see, and you can combine the wisdom. For example, if you go to consult a doctor, you're just talking to one person, and that one person has seen a specific set of patients during his or her lifetime, right?
mm,
Since they started practicing. But if you take your problem to an algorithm, that algorithm has potentially seen thousands of or 10,000 times more data than that single doctor, right?
mm.
So that's where you can bring benefit to people through AI when that happens. And and also in healthcare, for example, in drug discovery, people are using AI. Drug discovery used to be a very complicated and very expensive process, and we can all agree that drugs are useful. So that's a very fascinating area. But yeah, so in other areas, you have to think about what the benefit is and what are the disadvantages of using
Mhm.
some particular algorithm.
So to kind of sum it all, what when personally for you, what are the areas, what are the strategies that can be used if you ever think about them or if you're aware of them? What are the strategies one can use to reduce bias and improve fairness in artificial intelligence?
To reduce bias, I think we need to make high level decisions more transparent, I'd say, about how things are happening. And reducing bias itself is a technical problem. And I think people should be made more. The first step is to make people more aware of uh, why bias is there and how to reduce it in our everyday decisions, in our day-to-day decisions. And people should be made more conscious of the fact that the decisions they take are often arbitrary and arise from subconscious, right, as compared to being very logical and rational. So, what can be done about AI is that, particularly data privacy is, I think, a very specific issue, a very important issue there, and that can be regulated well. So, for example, the European Union passed a law in 2018, and that heavily regulates how consumers are going to give their information to any company and how that company is going to use that information. So, that has brought about some changes. So, I think similar things should be happening here too. And as far as algorithms are concerned, for example, self-driving car algorithms, yeah, again, those should be made more transparent, and these things will have to be worked out in the law. For example, who is responsible for the algorithm, for the decision that an algorithm makes? Yeah.
But it is a complicated system, and I feel like there's a long way to go before we're able to solve the puzzle and kind of, reach to any state that could be remotely called bias free.
Bias free, yeah, again, bias is a very hard problem. And how do you eliminate bias from a society? I think that goes back to that question. And is there any society which you can call completely bias free in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of age again? So
So we're back to where
I
we
think these
started
are
this
very hard
conversation
questions.
from, really, that as humans, can we ever be bias free? And that is a question I think we'll have to explore more. And I guess these 30 minutes of conversation is not enough to explore that. But thank you so much, Nimra, for taking out time to talk to me. I feel like we'll have to have a
Yes,
conversation
thanks
again.
for inviting me.
No, of
Thanks
course.
for inviting me. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Have
You
a
have a
good
great
day.
day ahead.
Bye.
Bye bye.